How do they make those assessments? What sort of criteria do they use to then go to government and say it needs to be raised or it needs to be lowered?
So within ASIO and other intelligence agencies, there'll be a number of desks or areas of responsibility. So it could be Sunni Salafist groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS. It could be weapons of mass destruction. It could be political motivated groups. They'll have their little teams. And within those teams, they have collection requirements. So it's a number of literally questions. What is the current threat groups? Who is involved in those threat groups? What capabilities do those threat groups have? Then the individual analysts look at who across the spectrum of the intelligence community has the ability to collect that information that I need to make my report. So they send those information requests out or requests for information to the agencies, to ASD or DIGO and some other agencies, and they'll say, do you have any collector or collection capability that can answer this question? And that's the loop. And then they get those answers back. They may be the full answer. There may be gaps. Then they ask. And they continually do that. And that's this circle that the intelligence cycle is. So when they get new information, that goes into the next brief. And each brief is only as correct as the time it's presented. And as an analyst, I'd get up and say, sir, this brief is correct as at 0 whatever on this date. And so all the information, because it could be a day old, it could be a week old, that's the information we had that went into the product that I made my assessments from. And it's those assessments that form the advice to government or to leaders.
Okay, take your intelligence hat off now and put your evil political hat on. What reasons would there be for a government to get that advice and sit on it?
To protect Clare O'Neil. If you recall, Clare O'Neil was under a lot of pressure all this year. And if the government had have raised or changed the terrorism threat during that period, all the questions would have been about, are you going to remove the Home Affairs Minister? She was already in a heat through the Thomas Carrick incident, through the NZYQ refugee, the High Court ruling, through cyber intrusions, the border, boat people landing on the northern Australia for sovereign borders. This would have been another one, and this is the actual tip of her role, is keeping the country safe, and the opposition and the media would have gone after her. So I think this was done to protect Clare O'Neil.
All right, Shane, if you're the boss of ASIO, you wouldn't be impressed with the government sitting on information that they should lower the threat level, would you?
No, and I think that's why Mike Burgess has aired this. When you're in the intelligence community, it's one of the first things and the hardest things you've actually got to get used to is decision makers not taking your advice. The quote when I did my training was water off a duck's back, but you can't take it personally, because at the end of the day, you can influence and you can advise, but you don't make the decision. They're the politicians, they're the leaders. That's their job to make the decision, because you don't have all the information. They have information from other fields, from other ministries, and they've got to weigh it up. And in this case, a Prime Minister has to weigh it up at a political level before he makes whatever decision he decides.
All right, so fast forward to August this year, there's been some movement in ministerial positions, and immediately the government receives advice to elevate the threat level in Australia. They act. Why immediately this time?
Because, again, I think he'd already made the decision and removed Clare O'Neil, and that gave him breathing space, because if you look at the questions from the media, there was none. There was none about Clare O'Neil, and she made a lot of presentations and announcements in her new portfolio, and that took all that pressure away from her and the government. It all became about Mike Burgess, and he went and made a lot of interviews, and that became the story. No one asked the story about that. Why wasn't it done earlier?
There's still something gnawing away at me about the change in this threat level and what Mike Burgess said at that press conference last week. ASIO refuses to say that this threat level has been raised because of the Gaza war and local Islamic extremists who want to use it to hurt an Israeli ally like Australia. Why? Who else is likely to hurt Australia? Seriously.
So I don't think we're seeing a spike, from my information, of Sunni Salafist either groups or individual supporters that we saw in the 2011 to 2014 period when ISIS was really at its height, both online and had the caliphate, when we had a lot of foreign fighters going over there. So I think that it's still there, and in Western Sydney and other places, it's still very strong. But the government have put hundreds of millions of dollars into the collection of that. So they've actually got a pretty good idea of that threat picture. It's the online youth space that is their real worry now. The fact that some young kids could stab a bishop, that they had online chat groups, that's the real concern. And if you actually pull apart what Mike Burgess said and the Prime Minister, that's their worry, is what they don't know. And, you know, when the Prime Minister says that parents should be alert within the house, and if they see anything, they should say something, I think that's their real worry, but they're not going to come out and say, we're scared of all our teenagers in Australia.
All right, ASIO's boss has conceded that his organisation is stretched as it grapples with a growing number of unpredictable and complex violent extremist threats. How stretched are they, are you hearing? And is that a dangerous scenario?
I think that's a bit of a cash grab. He's one cog in a very big Australian intelligence community. So he's
he wants more money, Shane.
Agents. Yeah, 100%. And that's to be honest, that's what the national security game is all about, is getting money, making people scared. We can protect you, give us more money.
Okay. We've already spoken on the program tonight about this threat from Iran to strike Israel this week, but from your perspective, so much for the element of surprise. We know it's coming. How will this play out, do you think? Because the last time they struck, it was a kind of lettuce leaf retaliation, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was very much done a proportionate response. And, you know, they've got to be seen to be doing something, but not overcommit and escalate the conflict. The Iranians have been at a meeting for the past couple of weeks with all the other Gulf countries, so UAE, Qatar, Saudi. Now, generally and historically, there's a divide between them being Sunni and the Iranians being Shia. But they're coming together because their common enemy is Israel, and Israel know that. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu went to the White House and spoke with Joe Biden, and this was agreed upon. There's no way Israel would have conducted the attacks against Hamas and Hezbollah without US approval. And we're seeing now the US are moving massive, aircraft carrier battle groups, ramping up their surveillance and sending more troops into that region, waiting for and to support Israel for a state-on-state response from Iran.
Something very minor, but certainly the loss of life in Queensland, this helicopter crash in Cairns. It's bizarre. The chopper smashed into Doubletree by Hilton Hotel at 1:50 a.m. yesterday. It was a stolen helicopter. Would you need to be a pilot to steal one of these things?
So I actually spoke with my cousin about this yesterday. She's a former Army Black Hawk pilot. And you need some familiarity with a helicopter because it's not just like a car turning a key. You've got foot pedals, you've got other joysticks that have got to be used in synchronisation for lift, for movement, for speed. So you've got to have some, my understanding is you would definitely need some understanding of that to get the helicopter, the start sequence, and get it off the ground. Once it's off the ground, she said it's not that hard to keep it in the air. Landing would be a different matter, as we've seen around the world. But she said that the person who stole it would have had to have some knowledge of how to fly a helicopter.
When you were in special ops, were you ever taught how to fly a helicopter?
No, and I was disappointed. I remember as a kid watching the Rambo movies, and they said that he could drive a tank and he could fly a helicopter, and I never met any. I was never trained in that, and never worked with anyone else that was. So I was a bit disappointed. The 10-year-old in me was, but no.
Okay, Shane Healy, great analysis once again. Thank you so much for your time.
Anytime, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, former ADF Intel analyst Shane Healy, always good to have him on the program, and you'll see more of him right here too, with so many issues to tackle on counter-terrorism and, of course, the war in the Middle East.